My name was Julia, and for 11 years, I was the heart and soul of the logistics department at Summit Sporting Goods. I did not just process orders or track shipments. I knew our supply chain like I knew my own heartbeat. I had spent over a decade building personal relationships with our best overseas manufacturers. When a shipment got lost somewhere between Taiwan and Texas, I was the one who made the calls and found it. When an order got messed up and a client was threatening to walk, I was the one who fixed it. I knew which factories prioritized quality over speed. I knew which shipping companies cut corners. I knew the names of warehouse managers in 3 different countries. That knowledge was not something you could learn from a manual or a training video. It came from years of experience, late-night phone calls, and genuine relationships built on trust and respect. I loved that job more than I had ever loved any job before. It was more than work. It was my second home. Then everything changed. Summit Sporting Goods was bought by a larger conglomerate called Apex Holdings. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning in March. Our CEO gathered everyone in the main warehouse and told us this was good news. He said we would have more resources, more opportunities for growth, and more stability. He used words like exciting and transformative. But I felt something else. A knot in my stomach. A quiet sense of dread that I could not explain. The older employees, the ones who had been through corporate buyouts before, exchanged worried looks. We had all heard stories about what happened when big companies swallowed smaller ones. Promises of growth usually meant layoffs. Opportunities usually meant restructuring. And stability usually meant the exact opposite. But we smiled and clapped anyway because what else could we do? Within a week, the changes started. New people showed up. New systems were implemented. And everything I had spent 11 years building started to crumble. The first person from Apex Holdings to arrive was Paul. He was young, probably in his early 30s, with an expensive suit and a handshake that felt like a performance. He was introduced as the new vice president of operations, which meant he was now my boss. He called an all-hands meeting his first day. We all crowded into the conference room, and he stood at the front with a laptop and a confident smile that never quite reached his eyes. He talked about leveraging synergies and disrupting old models. He used the word optimization at least 15 times. He said we were going to streamline everything, eliminate inefficiencies, and position Summit for exponential growth. People nodded along, but I could tell most of them had no idea what he was actually saying. I understood perfectly though. He was planning to tear apart everything that worked and replace it with something cheaper. A cold, heavy feeling settled in my stomach. I knew where this was heading. Within 2 weeks, Paul brought in a team of consultants. They were all young, fresh out of business school, carrying tablets and wearing lanyards with the Apex logo. They walked around the office asking questions, taking notes, and studying our processes like we were lab rats in an experiment. One of them, a woman named Ashley, spent 3 days shadowing me. She asked me to explain every single thing I did. How I communicated with suppliers. How I tracked shipments. How I handled problems. I showed her everything. I walked her through the systems I had built, the spreadsheets I had created, the relationships I had nurtured. She wrote it all down in her tablet, nodding and saying things like interesting and noted. But I could tell she did not understand the why behind any of it. She saw steps and processes. She did not see the years of trust and experience that made those processes actually work. When she left, I felt like I had just given away all my secrets to someone who had no idea what to do with them. A month after Paul arrived, he called me into his office. He told me he had some exciting news. Summit was hiring a new logistics coordinator, someone younger who could help modernize our systems. He said I would be training this person. He called it an opportunity for me to focus on more strategic projects. I asked what strategic projects he meant. He gave me a vague answer about future initiatives and developing new vendor partnerships. But no specific projects ever materialized. Instead, I spent the next 3 weeks training a kid named Derek who had just graduated from college. Derek was polite and eager, but he knew nothing about logistics. I taught him how to use our software, how to communicate with suppliers, how to read shipping documents. The whole time, a voice in my head kept saying, "You are training your replacement." I tried to ignore it. I tried to believe Paul's words about strategic projects. But deep down, I knew the truth. I just did not want to admit it. The warning signs kept piling up. One morning, I tried to log into our supplier database, the one I used every single day to check inventory and communicate with factories. My password did not work. I called IT, and they told me my access had been restricted as part of a security update. When I asked Paul about it, he barely looked up from his laptop. "Just a standard protocol," he said. "We are tightening access controls across the board. You will get it back soon." But I never did. A week later, I was removed from an email chain with one of our key manufacturers in China. When I asked why, Paul said they were restructuring communication channels to be more efficient. Everything I had built, everything I had access to, was slowly being taken away. I felt myself being pushed to the sidelines, inch by inch, and there was nothing I could do about it. I started updating my resume, just in case. But I did not really believe they would actually let me go. Not after 11 years. I was so naive. The meeting invite appeared on my calendar on a Friday morning in late May. It was titled Discussion on Future Role. The attendees were Paul and someone from HR named Linda. My stomach dropped the second I saw it. I knew what this was. I had seen other people get these same vague meeting invites before they disappeared from the office. I spent the weekend in a haze of anxiety, barely sleeping, running through every possible scenario in my head. Monday morning came too fast. I put on my best professional outfit, like dressing well could somehow protect me from what was coming. I walked into the conference room at exactly 9 a.m. Paul was already there, sitting at the head of the table with his laptop open. Linda from HR sat next to him with a folder and a sympathetic expression that made my blood run cold. I sat down across from them, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. And I waited for them to destroy my life. Paul spoke first. His tone was measured and rehearsed, like he had practiced this speech in the mirror. "Julia, we want to thank you for your 11 years of service to Summit," he started. I felt my chest tighten. Service. Past tense. However, as part of our restructuring efforts, we have made the difficult decision to eliminate your position. The words hit me like a physical blow. Eliminate. Not reassign. Not transfer. Eliminate. Linda jumped in, her voice soft and apologetic. She talked about severance packages and benefits extensions. She used corporate phrases like new direction and organizational realignment. But all I heard was noise. White noise. Buzzing in my ears. Paul said something about how this was not personal, how it was just business, how they appreciated everything I had done. He looked bored. He looked like he was already thinking about his next meeting. Linda slid a folder across the table. "These are your separation documents," she said gently. "Take your time reviewing them." But there was no time. This was effective immediately. They walked me back to my desk to pack my things. The office was completely silent. Everyone had figured out what was happening. My coworkers avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in their computer screens. I grabbed a cardboard box from the supply room and started filling it with my belongings. My coffee mug. My desk plant. A framed photo of my family. 11 years reduced to one cardboard box. A security guard appeared beside me. Not someone I had done anything wrong to deserve. Just company policy. He was polite but firm. When I was done packing, he escorted me to the exit. I walked through the office one last time, carrying my box, my head held high even though I wanted to disappear. People whispered. Some looked sad. Some looked relieved it was not them. When I stepped outside into the parking lot, the door locked behind me with a final, definitive click. 11 years of loyalty ended in 15 minutes. I sat in my car and cried until I could not cry anymore. The first week after being fired was the worst week of my life. I barely left my apartment. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I just sat on my couch, staring at the wall, replaying everything in my mind. What had I done wrong? Was I not good enough? Should I have fought back? The shame was overwhelming. I felt like a failure. I felt obsolete, like I had been replaced by someone younger and cheaper because I was not worth keeping. I forced myself to start applying for jobs. I updated my resume. I wrote cover letters. I sent out dozens of applications to logistics positions all over the country. But my confidence was completely gone. Every rejection email felt like another confirmation that I was not valuable anymore. I started believing what Paul's actions had told me. That my experience did not matter. That my relationships did not matter. That I did not matter. I was drowning. And I had no idea how to save myself. Then, 3 weeks after I was fired, an email appeared in my inbox that changed everything. It was from Mr. Lee, a supplier contact I had worked with for 8 years. He ran a manufacturing facility in Taiwan that produced some of Summit's best quality gear. The subject line read, "I heard what happened." I opened it with shaking hands. Mr. Lee's message was short but powerful. He said he had heard through industry contacts that I was no longer with Summit. He said he was shocked and furious on my behalf. He said that in all his years in business, he had rarely met someone as knowledgeable, fair, and trustworthy as me. And then he said something that made me cry for completely different reasons. Your value is not determined by people who cannot see it. Let me help you. He had forwarded my name and contact information to a smaller competitor called Pinnacle Outdoors. They were a family-owned company looking for someone with deep supplier knowledge and industry relationships. He had personally recommended me. That email was a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. And I grabbed it with both hands. I researched Pinnacle Outdoors immediately. They were much smaller than Summit, but they had a solid reputation for quality products and ethical business practices. They had been around for 20 years, growing slowly and sustainably. Their website showed photos of actual employees, not stock images. Their mission statement talked about respect, integrity, and craftsmanship. It felt real. It felt like the Summit I had loved before Apex bought it. I sent them my resume that same day. 2 days later, I got a call from the owner herself, a woman named Sandra. Her voice was warm and direct. She said Mr. Lee had spoken very highly of me, and she wanted to meet in person. We scheduled an interview for the following Monday. For the first time since being fired, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe I was not obsolete. Maybe my experience did have value. Maybe there were still people in this industry who cared about more than just spreadsheets and cost-cutting. The interview with Sandra was completely different from any corporate interview I had ever had. We met at Pinnacle's headquarters, a modest building in an industrial area about an hour from my apartment. Sandra's office was filled with product samples, supplier catalogs, and photos of her family. No fancy art. No expensive furniture. Just a real workspace. She asked me about my experience, and I told her everything. I talked about the relationships I had built, the problems I had solved, the systems I had created. She listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions. She did not interrupt. She did not look at her phone. When I mentioned being fired, I expected her to probe for reasons or red flags. Instead, she just shook her head. Corporate buyouts always do this, she said. They see people as line items on a budget. They do not understand that relationships are the foundation of good business. She paused. Mr. Lee told me you saved his factory once when a competitor tried to undercut him. Is that true? I nodded. He was fair to us. I made sure we were fair to him. Sandra smiled. That is exactly the kind of person I need here. Sandra offered me the job right there in her office. Director of Supply Chain Operations. It was a bigger title than I had ever had at Summit, with real authority to make decisions. The salary was slightly lower than what I had been making, but the benefits were solid and the respect was priceless. She said she valued hands-on experience over corporate buzzwords. She said my knowledge of suppliers and factories was exactly what Pinnacle needed to grow. For the first time in over a month, I felt like I could breathe. I accepted on the spot. We shook hands, and Sandra said, "Welcome to the family, Julia. We do not throw people away here." I started the following week. Walking into Pinnacle's office on my first day felt surreal. People smiled and introduced themselves. They asked about my experience. They actually wanted to learn from me. I had an office with a window. I had access to everything I needed. And most importantly, I had a boss who saw my value. The spark of hope I had felt was growing into a fire. At Pinnacle, I was finally able to do what I did best. I reached out to my old supplier contacts, the relationships I had nurtured over a decade. Mr. Lee in Taiwan. A shipping company owner in Singapore. A fabric supplier in Vietnam. They all remembered me. And they were all thrilled to work with me again. I negotiated better rates because they trusted me. I secured faster shipping times because they knew I would not waste their time. I identified which factories consistently produced quality work and which ones cut corners. Within my first month, Pinnacle's supply chain efficiency improved by 20%. Our product quality went up because I knew exactly which manufacturers to partner with. Sandra was amazed. She kept saying she could not believe how much I had accomplished so quickly. But it was not magic. It was just years of experience and relationships finally being valued. I was doing the same work I had done at Summit. The difference was that here, people appreciated it. They saw it. They respected it. And that made all the difference in the world. Around my third month at Pinnacle, I started hearing things through the industry grapevine. Old colleagues from Summit would reach out, casually asking how I was doing. And they would let things slip. The new logistics system Paul had implemented was a disaster. It was constantly crashing. Orders were getting lost in the system. Morale was terrible because Paul managed through fear and metrics instead of relationships. One former coworker told me that Derek, the kid who replaced me, had quit after 2 months because the pressure was too much. They had already gone through 3 different logistics coordinators. Meanwhile, their relationships with key suppliers were falling apart. The factories that had worked with me for years were frustrated with the new team's lack of communication and constant demands for lower prices. I listened to these stories with a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. But mostly, I just felt sad. Summit had been a good company once. And Paul was destroying it from the inside. Then Sandra called me into her office with news that changed everything. She was grinning from ear to ear. "Julia, I just got off the phone with Pacific Retail Group," she said. Pacific Retail Group was a massive national chain, the kind of client that could transform a company overnight. They want to do a trial partnership with us. If it goes well, they are talking about a 3-year contract. I felt my heart race. "That is incredible," I said. "What made them interested in us?" Sandra laughed. "You did. They reached out after hearing about our improved logistics and product quality. They did some research and found out you were our new director. Apparently, you have quite the reputation in this industry." I was stunned. My reputation had brought Pinnacle the deal of a lifetime. Sandra continued, "We need to deliver flawlessly on this trial. Can you handle it?" I looked her in the eye. Absolutely. Over the next month, I coordinated every detail of that trial order. And it was perfect. Not a single delay. Not a single defect. Pacific Retail Group was so impressed they signed the full 3-year contract immediately. While Pinnacle was celebrating our success, Summit was falling apart. I heard through Mr. Lee that their key factory in Taiwan, the one I had managed the relationship with for 8 years, had cancelled their contract. Apparently, Paul's team had been pushing them aggressively on pricing, demanding lower costs without understanding the factory's limitations. They had ignored the cultural importance of respect in business relationships. After months of being treated poorly, the factory owner had finally had enough. He terminated the contract and refused to work with Summit anymore. This was devastating for Summit. That factory produced over 40% of their best-selling products. Without them, Summit could not fulfill their orders. And it was right before their biggest season, the lead up to the holidays, when sporting goods retailers made most of their annual revenue. I heard they were scrambling to find replacement factories, but it was too late. The damage was done. And the consequences were about to get much worse. The full extent of Summit's disaster became clear when the industry newsletter dropped a bombshell article. Summit Sporting Goods had failed to deliver on a massive order for their biggest retail partner. The penalties were in the millions. Even worse, they were losing their prime shelf space, the premium positioning that had taken years to earn. Their stock price dropped. Their reputation was tanking. The article specifically mentioned operational failures and supply chain collapse. I read it 3 times, each time feeling a complicated mix of emotions. This was the company I had loved for 11 years. The place where I had given everything. And now it was crumbling because the new leadership had destroyed everything that made it work. They had thrown away institutional knowledge and replaced it with spreadsheets. They had burned bridges with suppliers and replaced relationships with demands. They had valued cost-cutting over quality. And now they were paying the price. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I just felt sad. And then my phone rang with an unknown number. I stared at the screen. The area code was familiar. It was Summit's region. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the notification appeared. I hesitated, then played the message. It was Paul. His voice sounded different. Strained. Stressed. Missing all the confidence and corporate polish. Hey, Julia. It is Paul. From Summit. Listen, I know it has been a while, but I was hoping we could talk. We have a situation here, and I think you might be able to help us. It is pretty urgent. Could you give me a call back? Thanks. I saved the message and set my phone down. My hands were shaking. Not from fear or anxiety. From something else entirely. Power. For the first time since being escorted out of that building, I held all the cards. Paul needed me. The company that had thrown me away needed me. And I had absolutely no obligation to help them. I thought about calling back immediately. But then I decided to wait. Let him sweat. Let him wonder. I waited 2 full days before I finally picked up my phone and called him back. Paul answered on the first ring. Julia. Thank you so much for calling me back. His voice was too cheerful, too forced. I could hear the desperation underneath it. Hi, Paul, I said calmly. You said you needed to talk? He launched into an explanation, trying to sound casual. Yeah, so, we are dealing with some operational challenges right now. Supply chain stuff, mostly. And I remembered how strong your relationships were with our vendors. I was wondering if you might be available for some short-term consulting work? Just to help us smooth out a few issues. Short-term consulting. That was how he was framing this. Not a disaster. Not a crisis. Just a few issues. I let the silence hang for a moment. I am pretty busy in my new role at Pinnacle, I said. I am their director of supply chain operations now. But I might be able to spare an hour to talk. Let me check my calendar. I made him wait while I pretended to look. I could do a video call Thursday afternoon. Would that work? He agreed immediately. That would be great. Really appreciate it, Julia. We set up the meeting. After we hung up, I smiled. This was going to be interesting. Thursday afternoon came. I logged into the video call from my office at Pinnacle. I had deliberately positioned my camera so the Pinnacle Outdoors logo on the wall behind me was clearly visible. I wanted Paul to see exactly where I had landed. The call connected. Paul appeared on screen, and I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted. His tie was loose. His hair was messy. Next to him was another man I did not know, probably another Apex executive brought in to clean up the mess. Julia, thanks for taking the time, Paul started, trying to sound professional. This is Martin, our interim operations director. Martin nodded stiffly. Paul continued, we are having some small issues with our supply chain. A few vendor relationships have become strained, and we have had some fulfillment delays. We were hoping you might have some insights on how to reconnect with some of our old factories, particularly the one in Taiwan. Small issues. Strained relationships. I almost laughed. I leaned forward slightly. Let me make sure I understand the situation, I said calmly. You lost your contract with your primary Taiwanese manufacturer. Your logistics system is failing. You missed a major delivery to your biggest retail client. And you are facing millions in penalties. The color drained from Paul's face. Paul tried to recover. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds worse than it is. I cut him off. Paul, I still have contacts in this industry. I know exactly how bad it is. I paused. You destroyed relationships that took years to build. You treated experienced employees like they were disposable. You replaced knowledge with arrogance. And now you are paying the price. Martin jumped in, his tone more desperate. Julia, we know mistakes were made. We are prepared to offer you a very generous consulting contract. Triple your old salary. Full access to everything you need. We just need you to come back and fix this. Triple my old salary. 6 months ago, that would have sounded like a fortune. Now it just sounded like desperation. I let the offer hang in the air. I watched them squirm. Finally, I smiled. That is a generous offer, I said slowly. But I am very happy where I am. Pinnacle values my experience. They trust my judgment. And actually, we just secured a 3-year contract with Pacific Retail Group. I watched the realization hit Paul's face. Pacific Retail Group was Summit's biggest client. The one they had just lost. Paul's professional composure completely shattered. Wait, you landed Pacific Retail? How did you? He stopped himself. He knew exactly how. The same relationships and knowledge he had thrown away. Julia, please, he said, and now the desperation was naked in his voice. Name your price. Whatever you want. We need you. I need you. This was the same man who had sat across from me in that conference room and told me my position was eliminated. The same man who had me escorted out by security like I was a criminal. The same man who had looked bored while destroying my career. And now he was begging. I felt a surge of emotion, but it was not anger. It was clarity. Paul, 6 months ago, you told me I was eliminated. You said my position did not have value anymore. You escorted me out of a building where I had worked for 11 years. My voice was steady. My price was your loyalty and respect. And you already showed me what those were worth to you. Martin tried to interrupt. Julia, we can make this right. I shook my head. No, you cannot. Because the problem was never about money. It was about respect. It was about valuing people over spreadsheets. And you will never understand that. I looked directly into the camera, at Paul's desperate face. Here's what you need to understand, I said. The knowledge you threw away was not just processes and contacts. It was years of trust, respect, and relationships. You cannot hire that. You cannot buy it back. And you definitely cannot rebuild it in time to save your company. Paul opened his mouth to speak, but I kept going. Summit was a great company once. I loved working there. But you destroyed it by treating people like they were disposable. By valuing cost-cutting over quality. By thinking consultants and spreadsheets could replace experience. I paused. I hope you figure it out, Paul. I really do. Because a lot of good people still work there, and they deserve better than what you gave them. He tried one more time. Julia, please. Just tell me what you want. I smiled, but there was no cruelty in it. Just certainty. I want exactly what I have right now. A job where I am valued. A company that respects me. And the satisfaction of knowing that I was right all along. I ended the call. I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. This was not about revenge. This was about finally understanding my own worth. And knowing that the people who could not see it did not deserve to benefit from it. 6 months ago, they threw me away. Today, I walked away. And that felt better than anything they could ever offer me.